There she was again, always at the same bench, beneath the withered branches of that old sycamore, like a ghost tethered to the past. Jacob noticed her first 3 Thursdays ago, a crumpled silhouette wrapped in a navy shawl, her hands trembling around a yellowing photograph. She didn't beg, didn't speak, just cried quietly, like her soul had learned the habit of breaking without making noise. He had been running late for his afternoon shift at the florist that day, but something about her sorrow hooked into his chest. It wasn't just sadness, it was mourning, heavy and old, like a house still standing after everyone had moved out. And today, something in Jacob finally moved him to act. He left the shop early, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers and baby's breath, simple, kind. Flowers that said, "I see you." He crossed the park slowly, heart pulsing with a kind of guilt he didn't fully understand. She didn't look up as he approached. "Hi," Jacob said, standing just close enough not to startle her. Saw you here before. Thought maybe you'd like these." The woman looked up, eyes red and raw, her face creased with time, and something deeper, grief rooted so deeply it had become part of her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her voice, fragile but clear. "Sunflowers. He used to bring me sunflowers." Jacob sat down, careful not to intrude too much. She gave a ghost of a smile. "My son. He died 40 years ago today." Jacob blinked. "I'm so sorry." "Are you?" she said softly, not unkindly. "Most people forget after 4 months. You're kind to notice." He looked at her photograph. A young man in uniform, smiling through the frame. Was he a soldier? Her eyes welled again, but she nodded. "David. He went off to Vietnam and never came back. Only 19. Jacob swallowed. He'd heard of that war in history class, but it always felt so far away. Now, here it was, sitting next to him on a splintering bench. "Do you come here every year?" "Every week," she said. "I tried not to at first, but something about this place, it remembers him, even when the world doesn't." He didn't know what to say to that. Instead, he handed her the bouquet. She cradled it like it was something precious. "You're the first person who's spoken to me here in months," she said. Jacob gave her a sad smile. "I'm glad I did." They sat in silence after that, the kind that doesn't need filling. Leaves rustled above them, gold and rust, as if the trees themselves were mourning. But the next words from her cracked the quiet like lightning. "I didn't come here to remember my son today," she whispered. "I came because I saw him yesterday." Jacob turned. "What do you mean?" Her hands clenched the bouquet tighter. "I saw him. Not a dream. Not a hallucination. He was standing right over there, near the fountain. The same uniform. The same face. Not a day older." Jacob felt the chill creep into his arms. "You? Sure it wasn't someone who looked like him?" She shook her head, fiercely. "A mother knows." He stared at her, unsure if she was slipping into dementia or if something far stranger had just taken root in his world. "I need you to help me find him," she said suddenly, turning to him with startling urgency. "You saw me. That means something. No one else did." "Ma'am to him, just a florist." "No," she said firmly. "You're more than that, or you wouldn't be here." He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was a strange gravity in her words, like they came from somewhere else, somewhere older than time and grief. She reached into her coat pocket and handed him the photo. "Take this. If you see him, you'll know. He'll have this exact scar on his left cheek." And his eyes, he had eyes that made people tell the truth. Jacob looked down at the photograph. The young man did have a small scar, barely visible, trailing down from his eye like a mark time had forgotten. "What if you're right?" Jacob said softly. "I am," she whispered. Then, just like that, she stood up and walked away, leaving the scent of old perfume and the weight of something sacred in the air. Jacob couldn't sleep that night. He stared at the photo on his nightstand, replaying the conversation again and again. Something about her certainty had gotten under his skin. He told himself it was grief, that maybe the woman had lost too much and time had folded in on itself for her. But another part of him, the part that still believed in strange coincidences and unexplainable things, kept whispering, what if it's true? The next morning, he walked back to the park before work, scanning every corner. No one. He checked again after his shift. Still no sign of the uniformed boy from the photo. Then on the third day, as dusk poured gold over the trees, he saw him. Near the fountain. Back turned, hands in his pockets. Still, completely still. Jacob's heart hammered. He stepped forward slowly. David. The young man turned. It was him. Same scar. Same eyes. Same exact face as in the photo, though that should have been impossible. Jacob's mouth went dry. You know me? The man asked, his voice low and calm. Two met your mother. He blinked, then looked away. She shouldn't be here. She wasn't supposed to see me. What do you mean? I was just passing through. I didn't think anyone could still remember me. She remembers every week, Jacob said, stepping closer. She's still mourning you. I know, he said softly. That's why I try not to linger. Are you? Real? David smiled, and the smile was both sad and something else resigned. I'm something. Maybe a memory that never left. Maybe a mistake in time. Does it matter? She thinks it does. David's gaze lifted toward the sycamore. Then maybe it's time I let her go. Jacob couldn't take his eyes off the man standing before him, the man who wasn't supposed to be alive. David's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of decades. There are things that don't make sense anymore. Things that shouldn't be possible. Jacob swallowed hard. But why now? Why show up now, after all these years? David didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the fading sky, where streaks of orange and lavender melted into each other like memory and dream. I didn't choose this, he said finally. Sometimes, the past just pulls you back. Jacob hesitated, then stepped closer. You said it might be time to let her go. Do you mean your mother? David nodded slowly. She's the only one who still holds me here. Her grief, her prayers, her endless sitting on that bench, it calls to me, Jacob, like a lighthouse pulling a shipwreck closer to shore. Even the dead aren't free if someone refuses to let them go. Jacob felt a cold ripple through him. Are you saying you're? Yes, David said. I died in 1975, near Da Nang. I bled out before the medics reached me. Jacob's breath caught. Then what are you? A fragment, David whispered. A shadow. Maybe just a part of her heart that refused to forget. Silence fell between them again. The air around them felt heavy, as if the past had thickened it. I can't go to her, David said. Not like this. It would break her. Jacob's voice cracked. But she thinks she's losing her mind. She saw you, and now she needs answers. I know. David turned to face the fountain. That's why I stayed. I need you to help her say goodbye. Jacob blinked. Me? I barely know her. But you saw me. That means something. Most people pass by and never notice. You did. Jacob nodded slowly. So what do you want me to do? David handed him something in an envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed but fragile. Give her this. I never got to send it. Jacob took it gently. His fingers tingled where they touched it, as if the paper still carried echoes of another time. Tell her I was at peace, that the last thing I thought about was her, and the smell of her cinnamon bread. Jacob smiled despite the lump in his throat. She'll like that. David looked at him with something close to gratitude. And Jacob didn't let her stay trapped in the past. She deserves the rest of her life. He began to turn, his figure already losing shape in the growing dusk. Wait, Jacob said, heart thudding. Will I ever see you again? David's voice came from the shadows. Not if we do this right. And then he was gone. Jacob found Mrs. Ellery had finally asked for her Nami at the park the next day, sitting on the bench, as usual, her eyes distant. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her and handed her the envelope. Her hands trembled as she turned it over. The moment she saw the handwriting, a sob escaped her. I wrote this, she whispered. This is his handwriting. He wanted you to have it, Jacob said softly. She stared at the envelope for a long time before slowly opening it. Inside was a folded letter, the ink slightly smudged from time. She read it silently, her lips moving along with the words. Her body shook with emotion, part pain, part release. When she finally looked up, there were tears, but also something else in her eyes. Peace. He remembered the cinnamon bread, she said, voice breaking into a laugh that turned into another sob. Jacob smiled gently. He said he was at peace, that he thought of you in the end. She nodded, clutching the letter to her chest. Then, softly, he was here, wasn't he? Not just in memory. You saw him too. Jacob hesitated, then said the only thing that mattered. Yes, I did. Mrs. Ellery leaned back on the bench and looked at the trees above them. I waited so long for this. I think I can finally let go. Jacob placed the bouquet she had left beside her on the bench. He wanted you to live. Really live. Not just sit here remembering. She looked at him, and her eyes, though red, were sharper, lighter. Maybe it's time I moved from remembering to honoring. What do you mean? I think I'll leave this bench. Go volunteer again. There's a home near my apartment full of old souls who need someone to talk to. Jacob smiled. That sounds like something he'd want. She looked at him, and her eyes filled with warmth. You brought him back to me, even if just for a moment. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, Jacob said. But maybe if you make cinnamon bread sometime, you could save me a slice. Mrs. Ellery laughed. Deal. That night, Jacob dreamed of David. Not as a ghost or a memory, but just a young man, barefoot on a beach somewhere, laughing in the sun. There were no scars, no blood, just peace. When Jacob woke, he felt lighter, as if something heavy in the world had shifted. A week passed. Mrs. Ellery didn't return to the bench. Jacob walked by each day, half expecting her. But the bench remained empty, yet not in a sad way. It felt finished. He kept the letter safe, tucked in a journal, not to invade her privacy, but to remember what it meant to see someone all the way through their grief and out the other side. Jacob started volunteering too. Small things at first, delivering flowers to senior homes, reading to veterans, sometimes just listening. Because he realized something. Sometimes the past doesn't let go until someone helps it find peace. Then one Sunday morning, he found something on the park bench. A small, handmade loaf wrapped in wax paper. A note. Jacob, for your kindness, and for bringing my boy home. Cinnamon, just like he liked it. With all my love, Mrs. Ellery. He sat down and took a bite. It was warm, soft, and filled with something more than just flavor. It tasted like closure, like love carried across time. Jacob didn't expect the cinnamon bread to change anything, but it did. Not in a loud, life-altering way, but in the quiet, deliberate rhythm that stays long after everything else fades. That loaf was a message. She was moving on, and he should, too. At work, the flower shop felt different. The hydrangeas were a little brighter, the sun through the window a little warmer. Or maybe it was just Jacob who had changed. He found himself lingering longer with customers, asking questions. Who were the flowers for? What was the story behind them? One Tuesday, a woman came in, no older than 30, holding a vase with cracked glass. She said her grandfather had died, and she wanted to refill the vase with something simple. Nothing sad, she said. He liked tulips. Jacob wrapped them carefully, remembering the way Mrs. Ellery had cradled that old photo. Grief doesn't always need to be heavy, he said. Sometimes just remembering what they loved is enough. The woman blinked, surprised at the kindness in his voice. She left with a soft smile. Later that week, Jacob sat in the staff room scrolling on his phone when a news article caught his eye. Mysterious unmarked graves discovered near closed military outpost. The outpost was in a small town about 2 hours away. A dozen graves. No official records. But one of the names listed partially deciphered from a rusted dog tag froze Jacob's hands. David 1975. His mind raced. Could it be? Could that be David Ellery? He sent the link to Mrs. Ellery's email, kept in touch with her once a week, Just casual updates, but didn't expect a reply that night. He got one 15 minutes later. That's him. I know it. My David. That's where he disappeared. I can feel it. Please will you go with me? Jacob didn't hesitate. They drove in near silence. Mrs. Ellery wore a gray coat and carried the same photograph Jacob had first seen on the bench. Her hands clutched it the entire ride. People think the past is gone, she said softly, watching the trees blur outside the window. But it lingers, in the bones of the earth, in forgotten places. Jacob nodded. Like the bench. She smiled faintly. Yes, like the bench. The outpost was little more than crumbled buildings and overgrown fields. But the graves neatly arranged, wooden crosses bleached by decades of sun stood solemn under a wide gray sky. A volunteer archaeologist greeted them and explained the findings. Most of the bodies were never processed. The war ended. The base closed. Files lost. Soldiers buried and forgotten. But some had scraps of ID. One had a photo. Another had that broken dog tag, DAV, L75. When they showed Mrs. Ellery the tag, she didn't cry. She simply exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for 40 years. This is his place, she whispered. They gave her a moment alone. Jacob stood back, watching her kneel beside the grave. She didn't wail, didn't break. Instead, she talked. Quietly, like he was listening. Maybe he was. She placed the letter he'd written so long ago at the base of the cross, weighed down by a small rock. Then she looked up at the sky. I'm ready now, she said. That night, they stayed in a small inn in town. Jacob couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, listening to the wind whisper through pine trees, when Mrs. Ellery joined him. I need to tell you something, she said. Jacob nodded. I was pregnant when David left for the war. I didn't tell him. I was afraid it would distract him, or worry him. But I lost the baby 2 months after he died. Jacob turned toward her, his heart aching. I think part of me died too, she continued. Not just from grief, from guilt. I always wondered if things would have been different if I had told him. Maybe he would have stayed. Maybe he would have come home. You couldn't have known, Jacob said gently. I know, but you live long enough, and the regrets get heavier than your bones. She looked at him. I see a lot of David in you. Not just the kindness, the eyes, the way you listen. Jacob was stunned. No, she interrupted. I know you're not him. But maybe you're who I needed to find. Maybe part of him reached out, and you caught it. Jacob didn't know what to say, but in the silence, her words didn't feel like fantasy. They felt real, not in the literal sense, but in the way truth lives beneath logic. I've decided, she said, standing. I'm going to have him buried properly, with his name. I'll stay here a few weeks to make the arrangements. Jacob stood with her. Do you want me to stay? She smiled. No. You've already walked further with me than most sons ever do. It's time you return to your own life. He nodded. I'll come back when the stone's ready. I'd like that. Back in the city, Jacob found it difficult to fall into old rhythms. The shop, the same streets, the same faces. They felt muted, like he'd glimpsed something deeper and now struggled to live in the shallow end again. So he did something unexpected. He applied for a part-time job at the nearby Veterans Center, helping file records, coordinate services. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt real. On his first day, he walked past a wall of photographs. Old soldiers, young ones, black and white, sepia, faded color. There, in the middle, was a face he recognized. David, smiling, full of life. Beneath it, a plaque. Private David Ellery. Mia 1975. Remembered always. Jacob stood there a long time. Later that week, he submitted paperwork to have the status changed to KI killed in action based on the grave discovery. It would take months, maybe longer, but it would be done. Weeks passed. Mrs. Ellery wrote to say the stone had been placed. White marble, etched simply. David Ellery. 1956-1975. Beloved son. Never forgotten. Jacob made the drive again. She was waiting at the gate. They stood at the grave together, And this time, she smiled. There's peace now, she said. Not just for him. For me. Jacob reached into his bag and handed her a small bouquet. Sunflowers and baby's breath. She took them gently. Full circle. They stayed in silence for a while. The wind was soft. The trees seemed to breathe with them. Then Jacob asked the question that had been living inside him for weeks. Why do you think I saw him? Not just you but me. Why me? She looked at him, eyes clear and strong. Because you listened. You cared. The world is full of noise, Jacob. But you heard what mattered. He nodded slowly. As they left the cemetery, she slipped something into his hand. It was the photograph. I've memorized it, she said. But you gave me back something I lost. It's only fair. Jacob stared down at David's face, young and alive and full of possibility. Maybe he wasn't just carrying a photo. Maybe he was carrying on. 2 years later, the bench was still there. But the woman wasn't. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep the previous winter, just before Christmas. Jacob had found out through a short note mailed to the flower shop. It was written by one of her neighbors. She always talked about you, Jacob. Said you gave her back her son, and in return, she gave you your purpose. Her words, not mine. Jacob sat on that bench the following spring, hands in his lap, staring at the rippling pond across the grass. It was the same view, the same birds, but the world had moved forward without her. In his hand, he held a photograph David's, and beside him was a fresh bouquet of sunflowers, just the way she liked them. He placed the flowers on the bench and smiled. You made it easier to breathe, Mrs. Ellery. You really did. Then he got up and walked away, because that was the promise he'd made to both of them. Jacob moved into a small apartment closer to the Veterans Center. He still worked part-time at the flower shop mostly on weekends, but the center had become his second home. He helped record oral histories, organize memorials, and write letters for men and women whose hands had forgotten how. One afternoon, while organizing archived service documents, Jacob came across a file marked confidential. Project Horizon Unrecovered Assets, 1975. Curiosity tugged at him. The folder had been misfiled, buried under tax records from the late 80s. Inside, he found a list of personnel lost during covert missions. Many names were blacked out, but one wasn't. Ellery, David Case, closed 2023 body, identified and recovered. Jacob stared at the words. They're at Wason paper, official, final. He made a copy, brought it to the wall of remembrance, and tucked it gently behind David's photo. Full circle. One rainy morning, an elderly man walked into the center. He had a deep southern drawl, a cane with a cracked handle, and a military tattoo on his left forearm. He introduced himself as Tommy Griggs, a former radio operator who'd served with the 32nd Infantry. Back then, we were just boys, he said, his voice thick with time. When Jacob mentioned David Ellery's name, Tommy froze. Jesus, he whispered. You knew David? I knew his mother, Jacob said, and maybe something more. Tommy sat down hard. We all thought he'd died in the blast. But there were rumors. One of the medics swore he saw him being dragged away. Dragged? Jacob asked, confused. Yeah, by civilians. Locals. They used to hide injured Americans in jungle clinics. It's why so many bodies were never recovered. We didn't know who lived or died for sure. Jacob's heart raced. So it's possible he survived? For a while. Tommy looked at him. If he did, he was probably in pain. Probably alone. But maybe someone held his hand. Just for a little while. That thought of David not dying entirely alone broke something open in Jacob. He thanked Tommy, then left for a walk in the rain. He didn't mind getting wet. That evening, Jacob wrote a letter. Dear David, you don't know me, but I've carried your face in my pocket for 2 years. I helped your mother find peace. And somehow, I think you helped me too. I don't know what happens after we die, but if souls can reach across time, if memories can slip into strangers' dreams, then maybe you were never truly gone. I want you to know, she never stopped loving you. Not for a moment. And because of that love, you saved 2 lives, hers and mine. Wherever you are, I hope it's warm. I hope it smells like cinnamon. And I hope you know you were never forgotten. With gratitude, Jacob. He folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. Then he did something odd, something he couldn't explain. He walked to the park, sat on the old bench, and tucked the letter between the slats beneath the seat. Maybe someone else would find it someday. Or maybe it would just stay there, growing damp and unread. But he felt better after leaving it behind. Life went on, but not in the same way. Jacob found himself drawn to people he once would have ignored, older men muttering to themselves, widows sitting alone in cafes, veterans with faded hats and lost eyes. He sat with them. He asked questions. He listened. And slowly, story by story, he built something larger than himself. A collection of lives once forgotten. A mosaic of voices. One day, a young girl came into the center with her grandmother. She clutched a crumpled photo. "My grandpa died in the war," she said. "But my mom never knew what happened. Can you help us?" Jacob took the photo. The man looked barely 18. He looked at the girl and smiled. "Yes," he said. "I think we can." That night, Jacob walked home and passed the bench. He stopped, just for a moment. The letter was gone, but in its place was something else. A single white lily, placed neatly where he'd once left flowers. He stood there, unmoving, as a gust of wind whispered through the trees. Not a voice, not a ghost, just a presence. A memory choosing not to fade. Epilogue. Years later, Jacob published a book. The Flowers We Leave Behind. Stories of grief, ghosts, and grace. It was filled with memories of Mrs. Ellery, of David, of the countless others who had shared their pain with him. The dedication page read, "To the old woman crying on a bench, to the son she mourned, to the strangers we choose to see, and to the stories that save us all." The box was hidden behind the rotting floorboards of the abandoned barracks. And if Milo hadn't dropped his phone while exploring the ruins, he would have never seen it. He reached down through the splintered wood, heart pounding not from fear, but that strange adrenaline only teenagers feel when they think they've found something real. Something buried. Something meant to stay lost. The metal box creaked as he forced it open. Inside, wrapped in cloth yellowed with age, was a leather journal. Worn. Cracked. The initials D carved lightly on the front. Milo didn't know it yet, but he had just found the last words of David Ellery. Milo was 15. His father had dragged him on a weekend history hike to the site of the old military outpost, now mostly forgotten and half swallowed by forest. His dad was a local history buff, a veteran, and a man constantly trying to get his son off screens. "Come on," he'd said that morning. "Let's go find ghosts." Milo had rolled his eyes. Now, kneeling in the dust of an abandoned room, he wasn't so sure it was a joke. He opened the journal in the car ride home. The first few pages were stiff, stuck together. The ink had faded, but it was legible. March 4th, 1975. I don't know who will read this. Maybe no one. But writing keeps my hands from shaking. Keeps my mind from drifting. I'm Private David Ellery. Stationed here for 7 months. We lost 2 men last week. One of them had a son just born back home. I don't think he even got the letter. It's strange. You go to war expecting gunfire. But mostly you wait. And when you're not waiting, you're missing something. For me, it's her. Milo turned the page, heart thudding. He read more, devouring David's voice like a secret. The entries were quiet, thoughtful, scared. David talked about music, about cinnamon bread, about how he couldn't wait to hold someone's hand again. He never named her. Then came the final pages. July 14th, 1975. They say we might be pulled out soon. Rumors of negotiations. Maybe peace. Maybe I'll finally go home. I wrote her another letter. This one felt different. I told her the truth. I'm scared. Not of dying, but of being forgotten. Of not existing in anyone's memory. If I die here, I want someone to remember I lived. That I loved. That I believed in something bigger than fear. Milo closed the journal, suddenly aware of how heavy it felt. Not the weight of leather and paper, the weight of a life. At school the next week, Milo brought the journal to his English teacher, Ms. Lang. She'd been in the military before becoming a teacher, and she listened quietly as Milo explained where he'd found it. Then she touched the cover and whispered, "David Ellery. You know him?" "I know of him," she said. "There's a book about his story. A young man helped uncover his grave a few years ago. It made national news in the veteran circles." She paused. "The boy who helped Peta runs a foundation now. Collects journals like this. Stories from lost soldiers." "What's his name?" "Jacob. It took a few days, but they found an email. Jacob at flowersleftbehind.org. Milo wrote, "Dear Jacob, I think I found something that belonged to David Ellery. A journal. In an old military outpost near Hilltown. It's real. I've read it. He talks about cinnamon bread and letters and someone he loved. I don't want to keep it. I think it belongs with you." He didn't expect a reply. It came the next morning. "Milo, you have no idea what this means to me. I'll drive out tomorrow. Please don't give it to anyone else until we meet." David's story didn't end when he died, and now it just got a little bigger. With gratitude, Jacob. Jacob arrived in an old blue sedan, wearing jeans and a hoodie, with the calm presence of someone who had walked through grief and come out softer, not harder. Milo handed him the journal. Jacob opened it, then closed it immediately. He looked up with wet eyes. "He mentioned her?" he asked. "Not by name," Milo said. "But yeah, she's in there." Jacob sat down on a bench outside the school and told Milo the whole story. About the old woman, the park bench, the photograph, the moment she stopped mourning and started living again. About finding the grave, and about how Jacob had once been a lost kid, until one cry changed everything. "What are you going to do with it?" Milo asked. Jacob looked down at the journal. "Scan it, archive it, and then maybe publish it one day. But more than that, I'll make sure his voice is never buried again." Milo hesitated. Then he said, "Can I help?" Jacob smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Over the next few months, Milo interned at the foundation after school. He helped scan documents, sort letters, and conduct interviews with veterans and families who had held on to memories for far too long. One day, an older man walked in and placed a folded American flag on the table. "I want to tell you about my brother," he said. "He never came home, but he wrote songs. I've kept them all." Milo listened and recorded, and slowly began to understand what Jacob meant when he said stories are a second kind of heartbeat. One Saturday, Jacob took Milo to the cemetery where David was buried. They stood quietly by the headstone. "I come here a few times a year," Jacob said, "just to let him know we're still listening." Milo bent down and placed a copy of the journal at the base. "I think he'd be proud," he said. Jacob looked at him. "I think you should be proud." "I didn't do anything," Milo shrugged. "You remembered. That's more than most." Before they left, Milo asked something that had been haunting him. "Do you think David knew? That she never stopped loving him?" Jacob didn't answer at first. Then, "I think some part of him knew. Even across oceans. Across time. Love like that doesn't vanish. It waits." Milo nodded. They walked away in silence. But the wind stirred behind them. And in that quiet rustle of leaves and grass and memory something old, something sacred, David Ellery was not forgotten.